After talking about how Lightoller and other officers performed at launching lifeboats in the previous videos of this series, I will now tell you about Lightoller's nerve-wracking ordeal as he went down with the ship, and how he still did his best to help others. His involvement in this epic event began as a simple jarring sound which aroused him from his bed still in his pajamas. Yet his actions in those critical few hours would unknowingly cement his legacy for obviously centuries to come. At about 2 a.m., 20 minutes before Titanic disappeared, the final standard lifeboats of Titanic were all gone, including both emergency boats. It was around this time that it became very obvious Titanic would soon sink. The forecastle was flooding and the situation started to become very panicked. The only remaining lifeboats were the 4 collapsible Engelhard boats, which had canvas sides and were not as seaworthy as the regular lifeboats. They were physically smaller and had a capacity of 47. Launching these 4 collapsible boats would prove to be the last task for the remaining officers on board, all of whom died, except for Lightoller. Per Lightoller's book, he could have escaped on Lifeboat D as it was launched around 2:05. Quote, "As we were ready for lowering, the chief came over to my side of the deck and, seeing me in the boat and no seaman available, said, 'You go with her, Lightoller.' Praises be, I had just sufficient sense to say, 'Not damn likely,' and jumped back on board." In the next few minutes, the 2 collapsible boats that were lashed down on top of the officers' quarters were freed to be launched, but couldn't be moved to the davits in time. They were washed off the ship as it began to sink rapidly, and Lightoller chose to dive into the water rather than fleeing toward the stern. In a momentary lapse, he began swimming for the crow's nest of the forward mast, which was now barely above the ocean. He soon recognized that he must try to get away from Titanic, and began swimming toward the right. Despite wearing a life belt, he was struggling to stay afloat before realizing the pistol in his pocket was weighing him down, and he discarded it. Lightoller soon found himself being drowned against the fiddly grating, which is a large air vent that leads down to the boiler rooms, about 100 feet below. Quote, "I suddenly found myself drawn by the sudden rush of the surface water now pouring down this shaft, and held flat and firmly up against this wire netting, with the additional full and clear knowledge of what would happen if this light wire carried away. The pressure of the water just glued me there whilst the ship sank slowly below the surface. Although I struggled and kicked for all I was worth, it was impossible to get away, for as fast as I pushed myself off, I was irresistibly dragged back, every instant expecting the wire to go, and to find myself shot down into the bowels of the ship." End quote. Lightoller was saved by all means a miracle, as he described a, quote, "terrific blast of hot air came up the shaft and blew me right away, up to the surface," end quote. Upon reaching the surface, he was again sucked down by the same vent, before somehow surfacing and found himself next to capsized collapsible lifeboat B, which he and Mr. Hemming had pushed off the officers' quarters roof not long ago. Soon after, the colossal forward funnel, which is about 3 times the height of my 2-story house and weighs more than modern battle tanks, collapsed and killed scores of people swimming for their lives, while narrowly missing Lightoller by mere inches. The wave caused by this sent Lightoller and collapsible B, which he was holding onto by a rope, about 150 feet away from Titanic. From there, he climbed on top of the boat with many others and watched helplessly as Titanic made its final plunge. Conditions on Lifeboat B were terrible, to say the least. It was still upside down, wet, freezing, and overloaded to the point where dying people begging for a spot had to be refused. Several of those clinging aboard couldn't last and became unconscious before slowly slipping away, including Marconi operator Jack Phillips. Lightoller was in command and was highly praised by Archibald Gracie for keeping the spirits of those on the half-submerged boat high, as well as keeping things organized so as many as possible could be saved. As daylight emerged, Lightoller used his whistle to signal nearby lifeboats for help, and boats 12 and 4 came to their aid. Lightoller was the last to be rescued from Lifeboat B. He eventually made it to the Carpathia along with the rest of the survivors. So, We have discussed Charles Lightoller's involvement in this disaster in detail. Was he a hero? Was he a jerk? Opinions vary as with anything else. Regardless, Lightoller was haunted by this event for the rest of his life, and that could easily be an entire video in itself. He was clearly willing to go down with Titanic, performing his duty to the very end, but was gifted another 40 years of life in exchange for being known as the highest-ranking officer of Titanic to survive. It would be very interesting to see how a more senior officer would be perceived in the event that they did survive and how their story could change the mystique that surrounds the legendary ship. But ultimately, it just remains another what-if story about Titanic. Thanks for watching.